Constitutional Conversations is a series of discussions by America's leading scholars about the principles, framing, ratification, and implementation of constitutional government in the United States. This series is hosted by the James Madison Memorial Fellowship Foundation of Alexandria, Virginia.
The Constitutional Convention, obviously meeting in secret at this time, discussed slavery on several occasions. And in these discussions, the New England states always took the same position. This is a moral issue that we're not appointed to address. So we should not be looking at this issue. Obviously, it would be good to eliminate slavery and the slave trade, but that's not what we're about. And so let's not look at that. The Middle states, on the other hand, took a higher moral tone, and you see a number of speeches, most particularly by Gouverneur Morris, in which they denounce slavery. And they say we must do something about slavery. Interestingly, George Mason from Virginia gives a speech in which he denounces slavery, denounces the slave trade, but also denouncing slavery, and it tells what a dangerous thing slavery is in the country. That is, it could be, this is not the words they use, a fifth column, and a dangerous element in case there's a war. They had seen what the British did, how the British used slaves. And so the more slaves in the country, the more dangerous that situation was. Danger from domestic slave insurrections, but also during wartime. And also Mason saw how, what a terrible impact slaves had on white children. It made them petty tyrants, and they grew up with that kind of mentality. And so Mason advocated the elimination of slavery. He said, God cannot punish countries in the hereafter, only individuals. But God will punish countries here on earth. And so he predicted a grave punishment that the United States would suffer because of the slavery that it had. Now, the southern states, on the other hand, they wanted slavery protected. Particularly, I should mention, the Deep South, where they were hurt very much by the British activities in the South when the British invaded South Carolina and Georgia. Many slaves were siphoned away, and those two states needed to replenish their slave supply. And so they were actively lobbying in the Constitutional Convention for protection for the foreign slave trade, and wanted to make sure that slaves would be counted in apportioning representation. So the Deep South, in particular, advocated the slave provisions. The Middle states opposed slavery and all the protections in the Constitution. The New England states didn't particularly want to raise the issue. And in the very end, you see that the New England states enter into a compromise with the Deep South. They both vote to extend the prohibition of Congress from stopping the foreign slave trade until 1808 in exchange for Southern votes that would have required a two-thirds vote for commercial acts, making only simple majority necessary to pass commercial acts in Congress. What the South feared was that the northern states would dominate Congress and prohibit the exportation of American goods in British ships, which would increase the demand for northern ships to carry the southern staples. The northerners would raise the freight rates. And so the southerners wanted a veto power over commercial acts. If they had a two-thirds vote requirement, they could veto, and they could make sure that no detrimental commercial acts would be passed. They gave up that right in exchange for a compromise that extended the prohibition for Congress cutting off the foreign slave trade. So there was actually a compromise between New England and the southern states.
Constitutional Conversations is made possible by a generous grant from the Fairleigh S. Dickinson Jr. Foundation. Constitutional Conversations is made possible by the James Madison Education Fund.